I just try to continue to enjoy making music, and I give myself that buffer. So I never release music like right away. I like because I feel like you're very vulnerable when you make a new song because it feels like it came from your inner landscape, and if you are looking for validation from the rest of the world, it's a scary thing to have that be the thing that validates you. So I think you have to kind of be happy with what you make and go like, yeah, whether or not this does well, I still stand by it. I think that's like the biggest thing that I do is give myself some space from like the rest of the world when I'm making music, and I try to just get into my own world when I make it and feel and make sure that I am making something that I enjoy making.
You're listening to the Freio
Music Podcast.
To the Freio Music
Podcast.
My name is Richard Houghten, and I live in LA, and I grew up in San Diego and have lived all up and down the coast. And I first was introduced, like my first music that I ever heard was through my parents and their record collection, and I just loved music as a little kid. And I remember like the first little stereo I got, and like my first pair of headphones, because it was just such a big deal. And I remember the first like CD and tapes that I got, I just listened to them on repeat. But yeah, that's I started learning how to play music when I was probably around 12. I took a guitar lesson, and I was just totally obsessed. And I was, at the time, I was really into Nirvana and like all the like Soundgarden and a lot of punk bands and stuff when I was like 13, 14. And played in punk bands and like really fast, energetic music. And then probably like around 15, 16, I was listening to like more like post-rock, like Tortoise and hip-hop and all sorts of music, and became really interested in how I heard DJ Shadow's album, and I didn't really understand how it was made. It just sounded like it was just instruments and I was like, oh, I thought this was a band. And then as I learned, I'm like, oh, it's sampled. It blew my mind. I just thought they were just playing all the parts. Yeah.
Yeah, well, it is such a revealing process when you start to pick apart how things are actually done. If you love the craft, you get to learn and listen, dig into the mix. There's that awesome website, Who Sampled, where you could go to and figure out, what samples are in the song that you enjoy. It's pretty fascinating to see how the songs are actually built in that way.
Absolutely. It just made me think of I did this project with DJ Muggs, who did all the tracks for like Cypress Hill and did the House of Pain Jump Around. And I was doing a record thing for him, right? I was cutting records for him at a live event. But it just came about where that sample in Jump Around, it's supposedly people on, I think it's on Who Sampled, it's like a horse sample of like a horse going like, wah! And he's like, nope, it's not. And then, but I think that was interesting because sometimes the artists don't even know what they were sampling. Like when you hear about like Madlib, he's just digging and he can't be like writing all these samples down. But then it's incredible how people's ears can like detect pretty much even like a split second of a sample. They're like, oh no, that's definitely where this came from. It's amazing.
Yep. And somebody's song, I heard "Hold Up," and that's all you need, and everybody knows where that's from. So it is interesting how the samples can really like jump out at you, or they could be used as some sort of complement to what you're already working on. So
Yeah.
when you started getting introduced to music, you picked up the guitar, you started loving the various tracks, you discovered sampling.
Yeah.
How did you first go about capturing the music? Because you started creating with the guitar. How did you end up recording, and what was that transition like for you?
My first recordings were done on a cassette 4-track, and where I took a guitar lesson, they also had used equipment, and I remember the 4-track was $50, and it was one of this. It was called like a Porta Studio, and I quickly learned how to use it, and just, I mean, being able to stack a recording, like play one part and then make another track, was the most incredible thing to me. I remember it felt like magic, like witchcraft. I was like, I can't. And then you could flip the tape over and hear it in reverse. So that was for me like all I wanted to do. And then I mean, what's crazy is actually before that I had a boombox that you could dub tapes with, or like record the radio. And there's this technique that I don't know if someone showed me this or I figured it out somehow. But what you could do is you could plug in. It had a little mic input. So at the time you had Radio Shack, you buy like a Radio Shack mic, and what you do is you record as you would like the same way you would record the radio. You'd plug the mic in and you just play your guitar, and then you take this tape, put it into the other slot, and then put in another blank tape and press play, and you could actually play and jam along to that tape, and you could just keep on doing that. And that was like, I can't remember if I did that first or after, because what's unique about doing the cassette bounce like in a boombox is it was infinite, but you had to commit to each one because it was just like sound on sound and committing to that tape, and it was really lo-fi. I wish I had some of those recordings. I have no idea like what happened to those, but
So on the one cassette was only your jamming, and on the other cassette was the song.
yeah. Well, so how you would do it was like you have to have two blank tapes, and then you basically just like you record onto one, bring it back to the playback side, press play, and then as that's playing and recording onto this new one, you could also record along to that. So then you take this one back over, and then you just keep on repeating
the first
that.
one. I see.
Yeah, yeah.
So
And
erase and just keep layering in that way. Interesting.
yeah, exactly.
Too.
Yeah, and that's I've heard of other people doing that, and but the 4-track the 4-track Tascam that I had, the cassette that was like made for that, was more higher quality. And then I think at some point I got a drum machine, and it was like a family's friend. They just, sometimes they just had, it was a wacky one. It was like a Yamaha, but it had like 99 fixed beats, and you could just slow it down or speed it up. And I actually do have that tape. And I'm just going crazy playing, like, at the time I think I was into like faster like punk stuff, so I was just speeding up the rock beat to go like 180 BPMs and being like dun 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 dun, and playing along to that. But yeah, it wasn't until high school that they had a computer class, and the teacher had a program that allowed you to sample, and it was kind of complicated and super slow, but I really was determined. I was like, I'm going to try to make something like a DJ Shadow-esque thing. And of course, it didn't, like, he was using an MPC 60, as I found out later. And he just would, it was really neat. I mean, he would just sample in records, and it's pretty innovative record, and incredible that it sound. I listened to it recently, and it still sounds really good. But I think it was Fruity Loops that really broke open my world, which is that, I don't know if you've heard of Fruity Loops. It's like a digital. Yeah. I think my friend had a cracked version of it, gave it to me, and at the time computers seemed really lame. I remember like in school you had to learn you had to take like a typing class, and it was horrible. So I remember my perception of like a computer was just everything that I didn't want to do. I wanted to be outside or skateboarding or something. And then once I was like, oh my God, you can make music with a computer, I was just in front of this computer for hours and hours and hours writing music. So that changed everything for me. Yeah.
That's great. So Fruity Loops, and then you mentioned stacking, or like layering.
Yeah.
in digital form too is now an eye opener, because you don't have to use those two tape decks. Now it's
Yeah.
just digital and infinite in both directions, basically. How long
Yeah.
you can record and how many layers you can stack.
Yeah.
So when did you start developing your sound and kind of honing in on releasing tracks and branding yourself and taking that route?
Okay, I would say I really started like when I got Fruity Loops. I also got this program SoundForge. Fruity Loops didn't allow you to sample, but in that, I'd say when I was around 17 is when I really was like, I would love to just be able to do this all the time. And actually, on that album Quantum Flow that I released, is one of the tracks. Silver Raindrops is what I made that track when I was 17 with Fruity Loops. And I was just going through some of the stuff that I had, and I was like, man, this is a pretty cool track, and it's kind of nuts that I made it that long ago. But I thought it'd be kind of fun to sneak it in there, and it doesn't seem to really jump out as like something that is 20 years old now. But as far as releasing my music and branding and stuff, like it's taken a long time for people to really know to hear my music, and I would say that it was mostly my friends that I would just share like tapes and CDs with, and they were very encouraging and would just be like, they just play it in their cars and stuff like that. And it wasn't until, gosh, like 12 years ago or so, I think that some of my songs were put in skate videos. And my brother is a filmer and films professional skateboarding. And they asked me like, hey, do you have any extra music that we might be able to use for these videos? And I feel like that really helped people hear my music, and kind of gave it a chance. And from there, like having music distribution, like a Spotify thing, and people can hear it all over the world. So that's it's cool growing up at a time where that was impossible to now. I have an appreciation for how amazing it really is that like someone in Sri Lanka could be listening to my music at like any time of the day.
Yeah, that is awesome for sure. And the ability to replicate and send things out for free, basically, and or as a Spotify subscription owner myself,
Yeah.
you know, like you have access to 10 million songs now. Like I remember going to
Yeah.
Sam Goody and spending everything I had as a kid.
Definitely.
And walking out with 2 albums, you know, and that was it.
Oh yeah, no, I actually did the same thing. Like I would go to Amoeba Music, and I had a full-time job when I was 18, and I lived with my parents, and I would go there, and I'd spend like $500 just buying records that I never even heard, and you just go home and be like, I cannot wait to listen to these, and you would listen to the whole thing because you spent money on it. But yeah, it was
Yeah,
a
there was
pretty
definitely
different time.
something interesting about that transition. Yeah, it's a cool time to be alive, that's for sure.
Yeah,
So I'd like
definitely.
to discuss a few of your tracks in depth.
Sure.
So one, Saving a Life. so there's like a really strong forward momentum with the guitar, just like a steady strum pattern, and then the kick comes in just like extra oomph to that moving, and then you start jamming. And I'm wondering how much of this is free form, like improv in the moment, or is it pre-thought out? How do you approach recording when you made this track?
It's very free form. And that track in particular, I believe I just started with that like gallop, and just had that phrase, like the 2-chord gallop, like dun 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 dun. And at the time, I was teaching guitar, so I always had a guitar in my hand, and I was also playing with my friend Casey Howard, and we'd play. There's a guy named Paco de Lucia, and he's an amazing flamenco guitarist, and we would always jam back and forth. So a lot of my music wasn't like representing what I was actually doing with my time mostly, and I think that song really kind of spoke to what I would do with my friend and how I would play the guitar. So it was a improvisation, the lead part, and I believe I played it twice, and there's like one edit. So it's like I took like the first half, and then I spliced together the second half together, and that's how that song, the intro and the lead came, and then it's a kind of a chorus. That part, there's some pretty wild stuff going on, and there's actually some crazy sounds of like I'm using I had saran wrap, or not saran wrap, the bubble wrap with those like you could pop those things, and I was going like pop 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 pop, and I was just running it through effects. That, I mean, like a lot of my music is pretty experimental and trippy that way, where like, or the sounds in that song are just like my car keys, and I think the bass drum is me hitting my desk. I'm not 100% sure on that, but it's like everything's pretty much a found sounds and kind of DIY pieced together.
Yeah, that's a interesting approach. So when you are deciding what sounds should be added and what sounds should be not added, what's going through your head, and when do you know when you found enough?
A big part is like I'm excited to get to the part where I get to like lay down like the melodic parts and play over the song. So I'm basically building up almost like a band behind me, and as soon as I feel like inspired to start jamming and riffing over it, that's like when I feel like I've made enough. So sometimes I'll add, and there's like a lot going on rhythmically, and I'll take a lot of the things out if like later in the point when I'm mixing, I'm like, okay, I think I went overboard here. But as soon as I feel inspired, like usually rhythmically, to start jamming to the song is a big part of when like the song feels ready, and kind of similar to like making a beat, where you make a beat but then there's going to be an MC on it. I kind of make like a track, but I want to play guitar on it.
Absolutely, yeah. So that guitar is generally the last thing that you're going to add, the improv, the flavor that you're going to save for last in the recording process.
Exactly. Yeah, because it's like I'm kind of itching to get to that point. Because it's funny is that part happens so fast because it's in real time and I'm playing along. But building the song itself, it's sampling and arranging. It takes a bit of time. It's like you're piecing together like a mosaic in a way. And so that might take like an hour. But then once I get there, I'm like, okay, great. This feels ready. And then it's like usually adding. Sometimes we'll start with a bass line too, just to get like a simple structure, and then I'll start like jamming with the guitar. And if it's on a computer, I usually like chop up parts and start arranging them. Recently, I've gone back to just using a tape machine. The last 3 albums I've done, it's been all on tape, so there's been like no computer involved. Just to switch it up, I just got like excited to try to. Actually, it kind of reminded me of how I grew up when I was a kid and had that 4-track. I wanted to kind of get back to that feeling of just playing the music and not overthinking it and editing it as much. So it just kind of got me inspired again to continue to make music in a different way.
Yeah, and do you think that limitation of 4 tracks is helpful to becoming like prolific, getting more songs out there, and not overthinking or over analyzing, micro editing 100 tracks?
Yes, definitely. I mean, the computer though is such a powerful tool; it can't be understated. Like what you're capable of doing with it. But the thing that it does take away is that when you're writing music with a guitar or whatever, recording it onto a 4-track, you need to retain all of that information within yourself. Like with a computer, I can write all the other parts and then completely forget about what that part is. Almost like it's taking on the entity of like almost like another brain. So you're able to achieve a lot, but it's also a little bit disconnected from the internal workings of what you're feeling in the moment. So that's like when I work on the 4-track, I usually can never come back to a song. I have to make the entire song in that like 2 to 3 hours. So it needs to be simple. I need to be able to play all the parts. Like in a computer, I might go, okay, I can get away with this little part, go back, play the next little part and piece it together. And I'm like, all that matters is that it like sounds cool when it's coming out through my speakers. But with the 4-track, I actually need to play it, and I can't make, if I make a mistake, I might need to make it simpler. So I think there's something unique about doing it that way. But the limitations can also be limiting. So you know, it's like I've recently gone like, man, I kind of miss working in the computer and having the ability to have like 50 tracks. You know, it's like it's just it can be inspiring to kind of go back and forth, to see like, all right, the limitations are great, but now what can I do if I have no limitations at the same time?
Yeah. So are you planning on going back to the computer? You haven't abandoned it for tape forever?
No, definitely not. But there's something about the computer that's not as fun. And I think it's because it's become part of our everyday life, like for everything. So something about having a designated music machine is really fun. Like when I turn it on, I'm like, all right, it's music time.
It's playtime. Yeah.
It's playtime. Yeah. So I've even thought about that. I wouldn't be surprised if eventually they start to integrate some sort of like music computer like that's made for musicians, you know, something that like makes it more, I guess, interactive, like a tape machine is or something.
When you are adding layers in your 4-track mix, how do you think about what's going to make the cut and what's not? Because obviously there's that limitation, so you have to be very selective with what you choose.
Yeah.
And with tape, are you adding multiple layers on each track? And if so, you know, how do you deal with mistakes in that situation?
With tape, when I have 4 tracks, there's always the compromise of like I could record 3 tracks, bounce them down to 1, and then that opens up 3 more to work with. But then when you bounce, you have to stick to mono because you only have, if you want to like bounce it down to 1, and then you're getting more noise because of just like the nature of tape. So there's these little things you have to think about, and you have to really commit your mix. It's like no turning back. If you make a mistake, you know, then it's you kind of are stuck with what you got. It's baked in. Yeah. So what I normally do is I start with a drum beat, whether I'm playing the drums. I just like imagine a song in my mind and kind of feel it, and I play the drums, or I use a drum machine and I just jam to it. And as far as like what I choose to release, what I do is I just try to make like songs every day, like, or a couple songs a week, and I don't judge them at all. I think that's like the secret for me to make music, is make music for fun. And because you never know what's good or like it's what's bad or whatever in the moment. There's days where you think like, I'm making a great track right now, and then 2 days later you listen to it, you're like, nah, I don't think I want to even show this to anybody. And there's days where you're just kind of like not thinking, and you just sit down and make a song and you're like, oh, whatever. And then a few days later you go, wow, that's like, that really hits. That really has some emotional impact. So what I try to do is give myself like kind of a lot of time. I'll work on songs for maybe a few months, and then I'll just like put them in my Apple Music folder or whatever, and just kind of listen to them passively, like when I go on a walk or something, so that I'm not focused on like the mixing and this and that, and I just listen to see if it moves me, or if it and I'm a little bit separated from the time when I made it, so it's almost like I'm listening to a separate artist, and that's how I choose the songs which I release, and I find that I think that's the best way to help me continue to not feel pressure when I'm making music, and then also when I'm listening back to it later, it's like I can be I'm judgmental of the tracks, but I don't have this sort of like ego involved. It's just like, oh, it's not a big deal that I spent a long time working on this track, because I think there's when you invest all your time into something, I think you just want it to be good, and it's really depressing. Yeah, if you spent like all day mixing something and then later like, it's not very good. But if you wait a while, you forget about all that. It kind of all blends together, and you're just like, oh, but I have a really cool track right here. And like Saving a Life, I wrote in one day, like in a couple hours. And that's like my most popular track. And there's been other tracks where I've spent weeks on them, and no one listens to them. So it's a really funny thing to see like what actually works out when you're with your music, you know? Like I actually wasn't going to release that song.
And how do you take that? Interesting. Well, glad you did, and I hope you are too.
Yeah.
So when you are considering releasing songs and you have decided, to let it loose.
Yeah.
And you put all that effort into it, and you never know what the feedback's going to be. How do you work internally or mentally and overcome that getting down because the numbers aren't there on the track that you work so hard with? So how do you keep moving forward, keep on a positive trajectory, and keep the creativity flowing?
One is that I'd always remember that the numbers don't mean that your song's good or bad. A lot of that stuff is luck. And I know this for sure, because like I've seen such amazing artists that just get like no streams, and I don't know why that is. And sometimes you get lucky, and like the algorithm finds like a place for your music and just kind of it takes off. And it's hard to know exactly why that happens. I'm also used to not getting any like people. For years I made music without people listening to it really, and it's really important. It feels amazing to have people listen to your music as an artist. It's like the best thing, above even like getting paid to make music. It's like just having someone say that the song reached them, because I think as an artist you are making the song for yourself as well, and to have it validated means you're kind of like you're not alone in your feelings. And it's I tell my friends that make music, like if you make a song and one person, if it really connects with somebody and it means something to them, your song's a success, and it just hasn't reached the others, because if one person likes it a lot, that means there's thousands of others that it would reach too. It's just how I'm learning more and more about like how music's propagated through the world, I suppose, and I'm finding that there's so much more that goes into that than just making a good song. You need to make a good song, but that's not enough. There's so much luck. Like I was saying that my music got used in a skate video, and that was because my brother was making skate videos at the time. Now I'm like, well, I don't know. There's no way to know, but if I didn't have that connection, maybe no one would have heard my music at this point. It's hard to say. But how to not get discouraged is I just try to continue to enjoy making music, and I give myself that buffer. So I never release music like right away. I like, because I feel like you're very vulnerable when you make a new song, because it feels like it came from your inner landscape. And if you are looking for validation from the rest of the world, it's a scary thing to have that be the thing that validates you. So I think you have to kind of be happy with what you make and go like, yeah, whether or not this does well, I still stand by it. I think that's like the biggest thing that I do is give myself some space from like the rest of the world when I'm making music, and I try to just get into my own world when I make it and feel and make sure that I am making something that I enjoy making.
I appreciated some of the terms that you used, like inner landscape. That you're sharing this inner side of yourself, and the feelings, and as you said, you're so vulnerable. So it's important to not put external validation as like the paramount thing, because it's out of your control. And so what is in your control is making something beautiful, something that you like, something that you're happy to stand by and release. So that's a great perspective.
Thanks, man. Another thing with I see with artists too is that like my most popular songs that are on Spotify, if I look at like the metrics throughout the years, I think they didn't do anything for 2 years. So in this case, everyone they
hibernated.
They hibernated, and the thing that they try to push on musicians all the time is like, oh, like your song needs to do really well right away, and it's pretty ridiculous, to have these expectations. Like, especially if you've worked really hard on something, you don't want to just go, oh, what I made doesn't matter because it didn't pop off, like in the first day. I'd say like definitely give it time, especially if you stand by and like feel like what you made is like really something like unique and like you have something to offer. Just give it some time, and there's a good chance that it'll come around.
Oh, that's great. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, and it's something definitely to remember for anybody releasing something that it's not necessarily about the day one results. It makes me think of, I don't know, do you know who Beeple is? Random tangent. He's an NFT artist, digital artist. He's been just releasing a new one every day, and his trajectory has just gone off the charts, but only recently. And it's important to think about the long tail, like the long duration of all your work combined. So speaking of a lot of work out there, you just released a brand new album with 50 tracks. So I want to figure out what was the flow? Was this a COVID release? Like how did you have so much bundled up for one release?
So the way I usually work is I have like the practice of just making music all the time. There's been times where I've tried to just make a song for fun every day for like 100 days. And so as you can imagine, like these songs just start kind of piling up, and a lot of them are sketches and ideas. And usually when I release an album, I'll just kind of narrow my favorites into about like 10, 12 songs and have it kind of tell a story. And I was talking to another musician friend, and they were like, man, it's crazy. You have all these unreleased tracks. Like, what are you going to do with them? And I was like, I don't know. They're just ideas. And they kind of encouraged me like, well, why don't you just release them? There's people probably might be interested in hearing those. And so I did think it's kind of cool that there's no limitation really to how many songs you could release like on like Spotify and stuff as an album. Well, I did find the limitation, and my distributor let me do 50, and I actually had 100 tracks, and it was kind of crazy.
This is great.
Yeah, I just thought, well, and I figured if I have those, just share it. It's like the worst case thing that'll happen is like, it just no one listens to them, and then they're up there like, so what? Out
of curiosity, was that CD Baby or DistroKid, or what do you use?
It was DistroKid, and I had to write them because I think there was like a 35 track limit, and then they said, oh, no problem, and then they made it when I opened up the website. It was like, now you could upload 50, and I was like, oh, that's cool. And I think it was 2.5 hours of material, as full length in minutes, and but yeah, it was kind of fun. And why it was cool for me is that I think I had this idea that I wanted to keep like that stuff just to myself and try to release the stronger material. And then I just was like, well, you know what? I don't really know what people are gonna like, and I found that to be the case. And like so one of my songs, what is it? Brazilian Vibes. Amigos. I wasn't gonna release that song. Like I have no idea why. I just was like, I don't think that it's. I think that I thought it was kind of like cheesy or something, and then I decided to put it on the album, and that was like one of the favorite tracks on that album. So I realized that I am not the best judge of my own music, and so it was kind of cathartic to release it. And one of the songs on there I made when I was 17. So I have like all these recordings from the time I was 17. I'm 40, so that's 23 years.
It's been a while.
It's been a while, and so there's part of me too, like the kid, to tell my 17-year-old self, like, hey, we're gonna put this out in the future, would have just blown my mind. So it felt good. It was just cathartic, and I actually have those other 50 tracks from the album, and I thought maybe down the line I'll just do that again. And it's like, the other thing is too, is I when I make music, I don't give myself any parameters as far as style. I give myself parameters as far as maybe like try to make something all with guitar or an instrument. But I'm like, if it comes out to be like a weird country song or kind of Irish type track, whatever, I just kind of just make it because I want to enjoy making the music. And then I kind of go, okay, I'm definitely not going to release that because that doesn't necessarily really fit in. But I feel like now that people kind of listen to my music more, it's just kind of fun to share it because it's like, oh, maybe they'll enjoy it.
Some of the tracks, like that one that you made when you're 17, did you end up editing it in any way recently before releasing it?
That one, I mean,
Or was it in tape form?
That one was not. Well? I made that in Fruity Loops, and and I mean, what surprised me was like after I mastered it. I mastered the album myself, and I do mastering for other artists, and so I was kind of like, okay, I think I can get this in good enough shape to make it sound like just cohesive with the album. And I when you listen through the album, I don't think it stands out as a song that's like 20 years old, which I felt good about. I thought that was kind of cool. But yeah, as editing, I did do a couple little edits, and because at the time the export wasn't very good on those, like the older computer and stuff, and there was this thing called aliasing, so you hear these weird little like hiccups, and what I would do is I'd just make small edits, and almost like if there was a similar part in the song that didn't have it, I would put it over here and just kind of piece together a few little edits that made it not have those little hiccups. But that's all I did for that.
Well, yeah, it's fascinating how the technology has changed and how the recording like standards have changed as well, and the compression algorithms and things like that. So for tracks that you're just creating today, you're working on a tape deck. Is that big with like a big reel-to-reel thing?
So actually I could show you right here. There's you could probably see that right there in the corner. Yeah, so that's an Ampex 2-track. Yeah, that's huge. That's more of a mastering deck, but the cassette track, my favorite format is the cassette, and that's what I recorded Sailing Through Rainbows of Sound on, and Three Seeds. And what I thought was neat about that is that those people listen to those songs like today, I think, and they hear them as modern songs, even though I recorded it on this like format that's like pretty old and obsolete. And I felt that was like a really cool. I was blown away that people kind of listened to them and didn't go like, "This sounds weird" or something, you know. But now, yeah, what I have is a Tascam 388. That's like an 8-track recorder, and that's in the garage. And I have the drums back there and a drum machine. It's fun. I actually kind of I will work on a tape machine and then make like an album with it, and then sell it and try to find something else, because I find something about like interacting with the something different kind of makes me feel inspired or creative. So I tend to try to like find something new to work with, like a new medium to work with, like whether it's a different tape machine or just something a little different to kind of keep me on my toes and learning at the same time.
So does that mean like a new instrument or a new plugin or a new something digital, or is it generally physical that you're working with?
Anything as far as just something that is a little bit different to keep, like it could be digital, it could be a new instrument. A lot of times, like I get inspired by, I think I have it right here. This is actually pretty old. This is a little handheld digital recorder. And what I'll do is just go on walks and just record sounds. And then I come back home and it's almost like a meditation. I just chop up any little percussive sound and then I throw it into a folder, and then I open it up and I just start making like rhythmic tracks with it. And that's probably been the thing that inspires me the most out of anything over the years, is collecting sounds. And then
cool.
And something about the chopping process. Sometimes I'll spend hours doing it, and there's nothing particularly musical about it, but it's just kind of like setting up what I'm going to work with, and that I find that to be like really calming. And then but now I have these libraries of just crazy amounts of sounds and stuff to work with, and
So I was going to ask a question about how do you organize all those sounds? So now you've got maybe hundreds or thousands of samples and sounds that you've created, twig breaking, leaf rustle, wind blowing, whatever it is. But how do you label it so that way when you're in the flow of finding a song that you can quickly find sounds that are relevant to what you're looking for?
Yeah, it's funny you ask. I'm extremely unorganized, but in some ways I guess I have a method to the madness, and because the computer does date things as you put them in, so I have a folder, basically one giant folder of sounds, and what I can do is when I run a search, it's just like 15 years of samples, just by the date. So that's usually for me the best way, because I can kind of recall where I was and what I was doing at that time, whether it was like winter or summer. But no, there's not. I mean, it's one thing that I've tried to work on is my organization, and it's like just the way my mind works. It's like as soon as I organize it, I like it. It
scrambles.
It scrambles. Yeah, and so that can actually be an issue when people actually ask for like stems of a song, or a session. If you're working with an artist and they want to like remix your work, there's been so many times where I've lost like the session or something like that, because it's a lot of work to keep things organized when you're making music all the time. And I have friends that are meticulous about that. I've just never been very great at that.
Yeah, well, I think it's a different part of the brain too.
Yeah.
So when you're creating music versus thinking about organizing music and trees, folder structure, and that's something else. Let's talk about a few other of your tracks. Egyptian Boogie is one.
Yeah.
So that's an interesting track, and I think you recorded that with a 4-track, if I'm not mistaken.
Yeah, I recorded that with a Marantz 740 4-track cassette. It's like a Japanese cassette recorder, and that one was really special to me in part that my friend John Green, who taught me a ton about recording. He had a studio down in San Diego, and we grew up together. He passed away, and when I went to go see his mom, she's like, I don't. John has so much recording equipment, and she just asked me if I wanted to have anything, and I remembered like about 2 months before he passed away, he was a total gear nut. Like he would just collect everything as far as like recording equipment, and he's like, oh, I have the coolest cassette 4-track you've ever seen, you got to see it. And then I saw it, and I was like, yeah. And it like when I saw that, I was like, I'm gonna make an album with that. And it's just something about like with John passing and everything, I was like I just saw it, I was like, I have to do this. And I had been working with a computer for the last like 10-15 years, so I got that, and it happened to coincide with a good friend of mine, Arthur Jolie from Sao Paulo, Brazil, gave me an analog drum machine that he had made. It was like the prototype. And it's an 808 drum machine, but it's kind of modified and sounds super wild. So with the drum machine and that 4-track, I just had so much momentum, and I made the whole album in the summer. And it felt really good to make that album. And that song, Egyptian Boogie, I think like I remember making it and just really enjoying making the song. And I was like doing things where I would flip the tape over and like get reverse sounds. I was even like turning up the input of the guitar so that it would just completely distort the input gain on the 4-track, and just, you know, basically just doing whatever felt fun to do. And when I made that song, I was like, boy, I don't know where this song came from, and it sounded a little different than most of the tracks that I'd made previously, but I felt really good to like make something different. And I was really excited to release that. There's like certain songs where I felt like something came out of me that I was like, oh, this, I hope people like it, but I also felt like I'm excited to share it.
Yeah. So it was like a relief or a release once it was out.
Yes, like the vision was like true to like how I felt inside. It can be really, yeah, it's so tricky sometimes. Like you have a vision and it can be distorted, or it comes out kind of accurately, but certain times the song just seems like it's like you like downloaded your dream into the project, and you're like, I think that's about how it feels. So I was happy with that one. And yeah, and you can tell too, like I did the mixing all on the 4-track, and like the drums are just like the same thing all the way through, but I'm bringing the fader in and out and just live mixing it. And so yeah, you can hear the volumes kind of just like going back and forth. And I think I sent that to a label, and they were like, yeah, sounds crazy. Like it sounds like the drums are going up and down. And I was like, oh yeah. And I was like, huh. And then, but it seems like, I mean, people have been listening to that track, so it's pretty awesome.
Yeah. Well, each track has a unique story and background, and I appreciate you sharing that one, and that it just felt good letting it go. So
yeah,
I'm curious in general, do you have a strategy for wrong notes? Like when you're jamming, because you're just you're going.
Yeah,
I think it's inevitable that you hit wrong notes, and eventually you have to address that. So what is your approach for that?
There's like wrong notes, and then there's like accidental notes. That the accidental stuff is like how the cool stuff happens. And like the hard part is like, let's say you're in a very specific key and you hit like a note that is totally out of that key, and the whole rest of the song is it can be, you just go, damn, I messed up, I got to do it again. Yeah. But experimenting and finding new sounds like that could just lead you down the best path. It's like taking a step that direction, and you're like, oh, that set me on this path, and that's a very exciting way to go. So yeah, I definitely don't think things are like you hit wrong notes, but there are definitely times when it doesn't sound right, you know, for the whole vision.
Yeah.
And the more abstract you get, the more you can get away with, you know. It's like when I record with the 4-track, what I try to do, like when I'm recording the whole song, is I really try to emphasize different parts. I notice like when I record in the computer, there's almost this through line through the whole piece for some reason, and it would be almost easier to have changes in parts, but there's more of this similarity through the whole song. And when I record on the 4-track, I have specific like A, B, A, like almost like more traditional song structure, which and I think that's because you're living with the whole track while you're playing it all the way through. So there's a intuitive want to hear some like harmonic variation, and like in the computer I'm working on like more sound texture to carry myself through. And so it's like there's two different types of like sound elements to kind of create interest in the song, and without all those like sparkly details in the that I can do in the computer, I'm like, all right, I need to like focus on harmonic change to keep this interesting.
And once you have those parts built out, as you mentioned, like the A, B parts, or maybe there's a C, how do you consider the bridge or the transitional elements so that it ties together in a fluid way?
Yeah.
But it doesn't sound like, as you're talking about the computer, with like that static thing through the whole thing, through the whole song.
What I found is that making things really simple is definitely a really good way to start. So like, even if you're just moving from like A section to a B section, it doesn't need to be like a huge jump. It doesn't need to have like a bunch of chords, because when you fill in everything, it starts to like take on a life of its own. And I think anyone could practice doing this. If you listen to any of your favorite songs, you're listening to the song. You're not listening to like one element of the song particularly. And you start to realize that it's all these simple elements that make up this greater, beautiful thing. So it can be really easy as an instrumentalist or a writer to kind of go like, I need to focus like to make this guitar part really like technical or something. But I think the technical part will come about with the layers. So I try to keep things like, if it's a bass line, I try to do something really simple, but have it kind of hit you. I want to feel it in the gut and just go like, all right, that feels good. And then when I bring the guitar on top of it, it's just like similar to when I was describing earlier. It's like, oh, this is so fun to play on top of this. It's like I have a band that's like backing me up, like for the different changes and stuff. And then so that's kind of my process, is just keeping it is pretty simple.
When you are making music, what is going through your mind? So when you are like, you're layering, you've maybe got that steady texture or background that's moving, you got the parts laid out. Now you're jamming. What's going through your mind? Are you trying to convey an emotion? What is coming through the guitar as you add that final layer?
Interesting. Well, I know when I'm making music, I have like a sense of relief when I'm making it. I would like describe it as to like the same feeling as like if you've been at work all day and you get home and you just like sit on the couch and you're like, oh, finally. Like that's what music feels like to me, is like I'm just like, oh, I finally get to be here. I think it's just a really comfortable place. But then the completion of the song is really important, because there's also the excitement to hear what you made later. And what I always find very exciting is that when you make a song, you think you understand what you made, but when you listen to it later, you're like, I don't know. It's like a dream. You're like, I don't know who that person is or where it came from. It's a pretty cool process, to get to be like, and it's also like, it's you, but it's kind of magical. You're like, I don't know where that came from. And so that's where it can be really fun to not really I don't try to give myself too many guidelines or expectations when I'm making the track, because I usually find that I find it pretty interesting later down the line. I go like, like that was an interesting choice, and
that context or the time difference is very revealing, because you're in the flow in the moment and you've listened to it 100 or 1,000 times in a row.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And you just keep looping over it and jamming, and then finally you're done, save it. The next morning you're like, whoa. I was thinking like the Will Ferrell, like, what happened? I blacked out, or whatever.
Yeah, true. And it's like you ask what I'm thinking about. I don't think you're thinking, and that's where that comes from. It's like, what's that? What do they call that? Flow, like
in flow.
In flow, yeah. It's like when you're doing something athletic, like when you've let go of like the thinky, talky part of your brain, that totally goes away. And so there's that, like almost like you're not, the recording part of your brain is not there. So you act differently and you're very expressive. And then, so I think we're so used to having that on all the time, like that light and camera, and you're watching your brain. And when you let go of that, we're just we're like childlike. And you're like, dang, like I don't ever see myself be that way in normal life. And then I think that's probably why art could be good for anybody. Like it's probably like how people experience meditation or something, or like doing anything that they really enjoy, but finding that thing that kind of just silences the everyday chatter or something.
So do you have any strategies for tuning your mind for getting into that flow state, to letting whatever the outside world, leaving the outside world outside the studio?
Yes, I think getting in the practice of making music, regardless of you, not that if you like don't do it if you don't want to do it, but I think the only reason sometimes as a musician you don't want to do it is when you start having these expectations, like I need to make something good right now. And I think as long as you just honor the process and just go like, I'm going to mess around for an hour, maybe I'll play the guitar. You don't have to record it, but sometimes it's just fun to record it and see what you make. And as long as I can kind of have that practice, it makes it easier and easier to get into that headspace. I also find that like certain times of day can be better to work on music. I work better like kind of in the morning. I also work better if I've had like, if I run, if I feel like in my body. That's just for me, like that's what I've found. Like I'm the most prolific if I've like been into like running and then I like wake up and I have some time to work, and not be distracted. I put my phone away. Like, I try not to have anything that's like I don't want to like get on YouTube in the middle or like check Instagram or something like that.
Yeah.
Actually, like when I'm really into working on music, I usually like delete everything off my phone that's like kind of like persuades your emotions a bit much, because it can just be a nice way to kind of get into a good zone.
Yeah, I like those strategies. Yeah, leave it at the door, but also delete the apps, because when you're outside at the studio, it's going to impact you. So yeah, that's an interesting approach. Looking back over your career, what past incident or potential failure ended up setting you up for success?
Like early on, I didn't have a lot of people listening to my music, but that still allowed me to just feel like I needed to, I did want to be heard. So I worked harder and harder. I was listening to other artists and realizing that they had a very particular sound. And I also asked myself at the time, like, I love listening to music. And then I just asked myself the question, would I listen to my own music? And I was like, I don't know. It's like, and I thought, why would I want anyone else to listen to my music if you wouldn't listen to your own music? And so I wouldn't say it was like a failure from before, but I think like having the struggle of trying to find yourself and not having like anyone care about what you make it can be good, because I just wanted to try to like make something that I would enjoy, even if no one else listened to it. So as far as the failure, like I think just as far as putting up album after album and being like, oh, no one's fucking with this, like it doesn't matter to anybody, but still finding a way to continue to make music. So it's also, you have to kind of reconcile the outside world. It's like, who are you, and like how you identify as a person in the world, like what's your job? And I always found like other ways of making a living besides working on. I never relied on music to make a living per se. And then and now recently I feel like I can, which is kind of incredible, but it took a long time. So I don't know if people were to listen to my music early on, how it would have affected what I made. I feel like there's like a bit of authenticity, because nothing really influenced my recordings at the time, except me just trying to make something that I wanted to hear. And it is really difficult now to not be influenced by like what people listen to of your own music. So like you were talking about earlier, if something does well, like with the numbers, no matter what, you don't want that to influence what you make, but it's hard not to see that and go like, should I make more of that? Because this doesn't seem like anyone's listening to it, but this people are all listening to, and you're like, it's hard not to be influenced by that. So yeah, I feel like failing for a long time is good.
Nice. I appreciate that response, and the persistence is so important to continue on, because the results, as you pointed out, like some of those early songs went dormant and are now starting to catch on. So you don't really know when the fire is going to get lit underneath some of those songs. Definitely.
Yeah. It's interesting too to see, like, I'm talking about like time a lot and time passing and looking back on things. I was talking to my wife the other day and being like, how cool would it be? It's like, all right, we can't time travel, but what if we could time travel as like we had a radio dial that we could listen to the future radio? Like, I was like, how nuts would it be to hear a song in the 50 years in the future and just hear what they're listening to? Also to hear like what music that they find is relevant then that we're making now, like I'm really curious, it's like
what stays the test of time.
Yeah, and it's like it would be really interesting if none of the stuff that we find relevant now is what's relevant later. It's like it's probably going to be. I was thinking I wouldn't be surprised if it's some SoundCloud artist that like no one's listening to, that they're like, this dude was a genius, and they just didn't
everybody
see it.
Totally ignored him during his life.
Yes.
And now we realize that he was brilliant.
Yes.
So that's funny. Yeah, it is interesting because we only have such a small window of recorded music. I mean, it has been transcribed, but as far as like recordings go, there's only like roughly 150 years or so of recordings ever. And so we're just at the beginning, and it's just an explosion right now. So the amount of creativity that people in the future have to work with, if you look back on sampling, is going to be wider and wider gamut of possibilities. So I feel like there will be definitely some interesting branches of music that come out.
Definitely. Yeah. No, it is crazy.
That thought.
It's interesting too, just to hear like recordings from Jamaica, like you listen to like Lee Perry or stuff from in Africa, like maybe from the 70s. And it's like a miracle that we have those recordings at all. And then the sound quality has such a unique flavor to it because of the technology at the time. It's like, I'm pretty sure there's artists now that are trying to replicate the way that sounds because it's just such a unique flavor of slice of time. I don't know what our sound is now. Like, I think we think digital is clean, but it'll be interesting. It'll be like maybe there's a lot of limitations that we're not even seeing now that it'll come to light later.
Yeah, that's another interesting thought. It makes me think of the digital tape crackle that you can add in using various plugins and stuff. So they're trying to mimic. They're trying
vinyl.
to go backwards. Exactly.
That's so funny.
Trying to go backwards a little bit.
Totally. I cut records, and so that effect is like the thing where I'm like, dude, because that's like the thing you try to avoid.
That just drives you nuts?
Well, it drives me nuts, and it also drives the QC listeners insane because you're trying to listen to the record and be like, all right, it needs to be quiet, and then people are adding in the crackle. So they're going like, all right, record needs to be recut. It's noisy. So, but I actually do like the way that stuff sounds. But coming from the mastering side, it's like, oh no, it's like two parts of my brain like conflicted. So.
Yeah. They're digitally adding it in, and you're trying to remove it physically. And there's a challenge struggle there. So that's pretty funny. So one of your other older tracks, Moving Pictures. First of all, its intro is super wild, and I don't really have words to describe it. You have a beautiful guitar come in, and there's finger picking, and you start to loop it, and you start to add melody. I'm curious about this track, how it started to formulate, and what strategies you used.
Yeah, I remember I made that track because I was listening to, I think I was studying some music harmony online, just watching like some guys get all trippy about like the circle of fifths, and that song essentially is the circle of fifths, the chord progression. And I think I was just playing around with like using more moving chord harmonies, and the intro is really wild. And I think that's like a combination of my like music concrete, like sample brain. Like I think I started with a sound and just basically was like moving the delay closer and closer and closer and closer together until it like became a pitch. And it's like I listen to that now, and I don't think I would do that now. That's another thing that I feel like at that time I just was like super down to be experimental, and I still am, but that's like it's a pretty wild intro for like how the song turns out. And
yeah.
Oh, I have the camera right here. I had this camera that I was using, and it's like you can hear it. Oh, well,
okay.
Yeah,
I had a question about that. I was wondering if it's like a Polaroid sample, but I don't know what that is. But it's a physical.
Yeah, it's a physical camera. Yeah, it's just like a physical camera, Canon camera, and I just had it on my desk because I just started just like recording sounds and into the mic, and yeah, that song just kind of came out in a like. I just was making, it's one of those things where I didn't have any focus. I just was like letting things happen, and that song like just came out. I think what I did too is what I like to do is like record all the notes on my guitar that are in the key of the song, and then I'll chop up each note, and then I'll throw it into a sampler so it's all on a keyboard. So that's going on in the song as well. And I wanted to try to not use drums, which I find like a fun thing to try and do is like make a song that has like percussive elements, but that isn't driven by like a drum beat, which like most of my songs are. But yeah, that was that song. I just kind of wanted to try to make something that was just guitar driven.
But yeah, what were some of the first elements that you added in order to build that?
I know that I started with the chord progression and then was just jamming to it, and that jam is just that. There's like no edits in that. It's just me playing along to it, and there's even things about that song when I hear it, I'm like, oh, I should have changed that.
I would have adjusted it now. Yeah,
I would have adjusted it now. Yeah, and like. I sent that song to a mastering engineer, and I was at the time I was always asking him like, how can I improve my mixes and things like that. And I think the thing he said, he's like, man, you should work more in stereo. Like your stuff is pretty narrow mono. But what's funny is I was talking to this older guy who's all about mono. So there's a lot of mixing ideas that are like, oh, mono sounds better. People are all about like the early mono recordings from like the Rolling Stones and stuff like that, and be like, oh, it's so much more powerful. So I don't know. Maybe my mistake made it stronger, but I noticed that it's like I didn't pan things out very far. Everything was pretty much down the center.
Interesting. Yeah, I didn't come across my conscious awareness thinking about the stereo picture of it, but that's interesting because the old songs back in the day, it was like the vocals were only coming out of one ear, the guitar is only coming out of another ear,
totally,
and you have to like things were really hard panned, and that is kind of disorienting.
Do you not,
at least in my perspective?
Do you not like it? Like when you hear it, is it you're kind of like, well, it's kind of off?
It's a little disorienting.
Yeah.
Sometimes, they go overboard with the cymbals, panning the cymbals too. So it's like some cymbals are on the left, some cymbals are on the right. And I get what they're trying to do is like create the sound picture as if you're the drummer or as if you're looking at the drum set.
Yes.
But it is, sometimes you can go overboard with it. I like a good stereo picture, but I didn't even notice if it was all coming down the center. It's about the music, but sometimes the panning will grab your attention, and sometimes it's a positive, sometimes it's not.
Did you see kind of totally off topic, but did you see the new Beatles documentary, the 3-part series?
No, not yet.
Oh man, it's really good. It's amazing as far as like seeing the old recording process and stuff and how they recorded, and then just because you're describing like those coming in different like sides of the spectrum, like hard panned, because those recordings have that going on a lot, and just watching, I think it's John Glenn's, what's that his name? Forget his name, but he's the recording engineer mixing it, and those guys were like the hot shots of their time. Like that's like how people wanted to hear it, and that at the time was like a really big deal to have like it's coming out of 2 different speakers, like it's like surround sound,
Yeah, so high quality HD. Yeah.
HD,
Stereo,
And now there's supposed to be like Atmos is supposed to be a thing now too. Like with iTunes, there's like they're talking about having stuff mixed for Atmos. Have you heard of it?
Yeah, well, Adobe Atmos, but I don't really know what the sound is. But I know about quadraphonic, octaphonic sound systems as well, which are like you got sounds coming from behind you. Which is cool. But is that what Atmos is? I don't really know the intricacies of that.
Yeah, I guess it is. It's like I forget how many different speakers it's set up to be,
like
but
5.2 or something like that. So you
yes,
get
and I think
5.1.
they're gonna. I think I had somebody hit me up, a mixing engineer who wanted to mix one of my albums for Atmos, and I said sure, and because he said that like the future, they're gonna try to be pushing that kind of stuff, and I thought, well, that would be really interesting to hear, like what it would sound like in this different spatial environment. I don't know if that'll be a gimmick that like is popular, or if it becomes something that are like, it seems like we're pretty happy with mono and stereo. It seems like it's enough.
I have put on fancy headphones though, where there's like a sound and it sounds like it's coming from above or below in a certain ear.
That's
so
cool.
Like they're like starting to tickle like your directional scape within one ear.
Totally.
And that's interesting. So maybe that Atmos thing could come to be, but I've only heard it in one pair of headphones, so and it's not these. So
I could imagine that guy Flying Lotus making some insane like head collage. It could be pretty fun.
Yeah, and there's another artist, DJ Taz, who's been on the show, but he owns like hundreds of headphones because he does silent raves and discos, and also does like yoga sets. So people have headphones on, but he was talking about the sonic soundscape to get like directional sound is so small. Like on a dance floor, if you had a bunch of speakers around people, only those in the dead center are really going to get the full experience of the sound. But with headphones, you can actually kind of bring in that experience to everybody, which is kind of an interesting approach. Cool technologies coming out.
That's really cool. Yeah, I've seen people doing the headphone dance parties sometimes, like at the beach and stuff, and it's all silent and they're dancing. And I'm like,
everybody's red and then flips to blue or whatever.
Yeah, it's pretty cool. I've never participated. I totally would. I just have only been like a bystander. Have you done any?
I've done like 1 or 2 shows that have had silent disco. So there's 2 DJs going basically simultaneously. You can flip channels A or B. And it's pretty interesting.
Okay, that's wild. I didn't know that.
So totally different, but yeah, you could just do it with one. Anyways, that was a good tangent. What, in your perspective, like what are the coolest technologies? Because you've been around for a while, you've been making music for a long time. What are you really grateful for that is available now that you didn't have back in the day?
Ableton's just like, a DAW is absolutely indispensable, like as far as mind-blowing as far as like what you can do, almost like to the point where it can be overwhelming. That's why I like to take little steps back. But if I could bring back like a computer in time and show myself like what you can do now, like something as far as like changing the pitch of a sample but not having it affect the time. Like usually, like before, everything was like you slow it down and then it naturally, organically stretches or gets closer together. yeah, it's like it's pretty nuts like what we can do now. It's there's almost like the sky's the limit. Um, and yeah, I'd definitely say that.
Cool. And when do you find that pitch correction or pitch change comes in handy? Is that when you're working on your editing post production on the guitar, or what do you put that on?
I actually don't really like it. I don't use it that often. I generally do the one
Okay.
I take off the warp and want it to naturally move because I find that to be kind of an interesting
Change.
feature. Yeah, but it's one of those things that like I thought would be impossible. It's like in the past I'd be like that's
Oh, I see
impossible,
what
but
you
I
mean.
think
Yeah.
I think just having everything all in one and being able to edit like seamlessly, like we can record 50 tracks and we could edit like each track as many times as we want, and
Yep.
there's no delay or slowed down time, and the quality, like you could record an album with a pretty just like a off the shelf microphone and a computer and an interface, and if you follow some just like basic recording technique, you can make a really good sounding recording to the point where I think people now are even like trying to find ways to make it sound a little bit more raw or like adding the crackle. You know, it's like we're trying to find ways to reintroduce some of that pushback that we received from the previous technologies. It's wild too. Like everyone uses these programs differently. Like I watch somebody else work on Ableton, and I'm like, wow, you use all these different features that I don't even know how to use. It's like it's pretty deep, all these programs.
Yeah, absolutely. But it's malleable too, so you can use it very narrowly, doing one thing, just recording,
Yeah.
or you could just do sampling, or you can mix and match it all, and then the two different views, session and arrange. It's really an eye opener because I work with Logic primarily.
Yeah.
So I'm used to the arrange view, but the session view is still like that's next level. You know, it's like
Yeah.
taking it into the performance realm. So
Totally.
when you are performing, what do you decide to bring with you on stage, and how do you approach that?
A lot of it's just whether or not I usually perform by myself. So I usually try to think what element am I going to play live, and usually it's the guitar parts. But I've thought recently how fun it would be to bring more people with me to try to play the different parts. And because my music has a playability, like there's usually just like a bass line that's played on a bass and guitar parts. It's not something that I think I could DJ it, but I feel like I'd be missing something because since I do play guitar, I want to play an instrument live. But the thing that I found interesting was like, do you know the artist Fortet?
Not yet.
Oh, he's a cool artist, like, or like, but you know Bonobo?
Oh yeah.
Yeah. So I always thought that like people would want to see, as a musician, I thought people want to see you play live and play an instrument. I was talking to my cousin, and he's a huge fan of Bonobo. I am too. I really like Bonobo stuff. But he was saying that he saw the full live band, and then he saw him just DJ, and he much preferred the DJ set. And I was like, oh, that's really interesting. I thought like as a listener of his music, you'd want to see it all like orchestrated and just played out. And he was like, yeah, it just didn't. I want to hear like what's on the record though. And he felt like the vibe was a lot better of just the DJ set. And I was like, man, that's like, as a musician, it's really interesting information because I do
It's
want
counter to what your intuition is.
Yeah. So, but I usually just play my guitar, and then I like take the parts out, and I just like mute my guitar parts, and then I just play them live. But I really want to do something more interesting, like so it's fun for me and the audience. I am still working on some ideas about like how I could make it more interactive, and yeah. What are your thoughts on that? Like as far as playing live and like music that's created inside like a DAW, like having it translate to like an audience.
Yeah, it's certainly a tricky balance. And I was just going to add in 2 cents that I'm sure there's somebody out there, if they saw those two same sets,
Yep.
Bonobo
Yeah.
sets, that they would have the reverse intuition. They like one person's going to prefer the band
Yeah.
and not appreciate the DJ set as much.
Absolutely.
I think it really is dependent on the listener on that. But
Yeah.
I am with you. I enjoy I think it's fascinating to see the instrumentation being played live on stage,
Yeah.
But there is an element whereas if you're going to loop everything yourself and you're just a solo person on stage, it takes a long time to build up and then break down and then build up and then break down. And so you kind of have to be a little bit more patient as a listener. So there is an element of looping, which is really cool. And if you have like some foundation to work with, the transitions can be fast and it's not going to feel delayed or slow or like dragging on.
Yeah.
If there's some sort of pre-work done, but then you get to build on top of it. So I think it's definitely a balance there. And how many people do you want to work with on stage?
Yeah.
And that's another question. How many instruments is reasonable or feasible to do?
Totally.
So do you know the artist Dirtwire?
No, I don't actually. I should check it out.
Cool. Yeah, there's cool guys. They'll be coming out in the near future on the podcast as well.
Cool.
But he was talking about figuring out whether or not you can physically get to that instrument in time on stage before the transition. So because they're playing so many different instruments that he actually has to think about like the physical movements he has to do in order to get that and play that harmonica or the jaw harp.
It's like a choreographed dance.
Exactly. So he's like, actually, that instrument's going to be over there, so that one's not going to work. I'm going to get all tangled. So, anyways, it was an interesting additional element to think about as to what you bring on stage.
Totally, man. I'll be totally honest. I have a bit of like kind of shy. Like I do play live shows, but I enjoy recording music in the studio so much, and the idea of live performance is like this whole other thing for me. That's like it can be difficult.
Otherworldly thing, yeah.
It can be difficult. Like it's a lot of work, and it occupies a huge amount of space in my mind. So there's times where I go like, maybe I just not play live for a while and just like it, because recording music for me is like such a solitary thing, and playing in front of people is such an opposite. So it's like I think about it a lot, and I want to find a way to make it so that I really enjoy it, because sometimes I think the more you do it, you probably get more natural at it. But I've been trying to find ways to make it like less stressful for me and feel like less of a performance and more of like a jam, and maybe like I enjoy to improvise quite a bit, and something about having to play the thing like just right kind of makes me feel like I don't know, like it's not quite as fun, and it makes me like a little nervous. But I'm pretty sure that's normal as far as musicians. And
for sure. And you want to do the song justice and play it right-ish, and because there's so much freedom in there, it gives you a lot of flexibility of what right is.
Yeah.
And then of course there's like an infinite array of like the things that could go wrong or the ways you could butcher it.
Yeah.
But I do think there is something to having like some sort of framework of how the set's going to go, and then adding your improv on top of it, so that way you don't have to stress about Ableton. You'd rather just jam the guitar. Yeah. You could basically just jam for your whole set if you built it in that way. So it is a different element, as you mentioned. So it's so important to do both. But without recording, nobody would know your music. So I think it's so important to hit that record button. Yeah. Because there's some good artists out there that I've seen live, and I look up their music, and I'm like, what is going on? Like there's one track, and it doesn't sound at all like the set I just heard. That's so
true of live performance and recordings. I've had the same thing happen where I like bought someone's record after I saw them play, and then I go home and listen to it. I'm like, oh, this doesn't have the energy that the show had. And something about like the audience and to participating and like maybe dancing, and it's like you don't have that experience on the record, and you kind of miss it. And then the opposite can be true. It's like the record can sound so good, and then you see it live, you're like, oh, this is not like what I was imagining when I listened to the record or whatever. So it's it can be interesting to see how like that plays out.
Yeah, well, I hear the live elements in your music, because you've got all that space and that foundation of freeform improv guitar. So it sounds to me like that would translate to the live sets. I have yet to see live, so I'll confess to that. But I'd love to catch you anytime you're in Colorado. So
that'd be awesome.
Reach out.
Definitely.
Cool. Well, there's just a few other questions I have for you, and then we'll wrap up. But
Okay.
outside of music, what are you into? What gets you excited? What lights you up?
I'm pretty into surfing. I mean, I live a little ways from the beach, but it's something that I did when I was a kid, and I got really into surfing, and then I was really into skateboarding. Skateboarding probably has had the biggest influence on my music and the way I like see rhythm. And as I got a little older, the skateboarding, I got a little, it was getting beat up, like my wrist and stuff and my knees.
I bet.
Yeah, so surfing was a little bit more conducive, and I really love the ocean and like swimming. So that is a huge part in my life. And then I love, I really like just being outside, and I'm definitely like kind of love things in nature in general, like plants and animals and stuff like that. But yeah, and then right now we just had a little girl, so that's been like the biggest thing in my life, and it's been pretty mind blowing how incredible that's been. It's been I've been telling people like it's the best thing I've ever done, and then the most exhausting. Most exhausted I've ever been as well. So yeah,
are you getting any sleep these days?
Yeah, I definitely am getting some sleep. My wife is not as getting as much sleep as me, and I'm like grateful that she's tackling it on. But during it's like we switch off a lot, and we're both, because we both work, so we're kind of, I get to spend a lot of time with her at home, and I'm showing her lots of music, and she seems to be very responsive to that, which is awesome.
Nice.
So you have a 1-year-old.
Yep. She loves banging on the drum, and
Nice.
She'll bang on anything. We had to tell her, don't bang on the dog. You know, like you can't drum on the dog. Like you got to pet the dog.
Yeah.
but she does love drumming on things, and she does a hip dance, a hip back and forth for any music that comes on. My phone goes off, my alarm goes off, music's on.
No
She's
way.
always dancing, so she's
that's
into
so
it.
cool. I've been fascinated about that, actually. Like, at what age do like children understand music? You know, or like especially rhythmic dancing and stuff. Like, it must be because I'm watching our daughter like just start to take in the world around her. You know, and at first you can only see like 6 inches in front of her, but now she's watching the dogs and she's becoming interested in the rest of the world, and she responds to music, but I haven't seen her like rhythmically like move to a beat yet. So
I wouldn't quite say that she's on beat. You know, I love her, but you know, she gives it her all right now. So
for sure.
She has fun, but she definitely, it's about the 1 year mark, at least for us, maybe 9 months or so, she started to dancing and you know, noticeably changing behavior depending on if there's music. So
cool.
It's interesting. It is fun, it's beautiful, it's exhausting, so I can relate to that too.
Yeah.
What book, quote, or message has most impacted your life? We could extend it to track or album.
Oh, all right. Much easier.
All right.
I think Aphex Twins. I think they call it like Druckuse, the Drux album. Like his, I think it's like his masterpiece of work. Completely changed the way I thought like music could be made and sound. It's a lot different than like the stuff that I make, but it's at the time it got me so excited about the potential, or like what music could be. You know, it made me go like, wow, music can be anything. And that and it's still, to me, it still holds up. His music's so incredible. That was a game changer for me. Do you listen to any of his stuff?
I know some of his work. I wouldn't say that I know that album in depth, but I definitely have listened to his work. So the abstractness, or the off the gridness, or the, you know, it's not traditional like classical music that's very structured, and I feel like the sound that is brought in is so abstract that it kind of breaks the mold of like what the traditional music was. I don't know if that was your experience.
Yeah, and I remember like first hearing the way he broke up a drum beat and turned it almost into like a lyrical phrase, like the idea that I think he broke a lot of conceptions in my mind of what music needed to be. And I feel like that's really valuable for any approach towards music. Like you can get into these ideas that music is this, this, and this, and then just to have it be turned on its head is like a wonderful lesson. Just to see the world differently, because over time everything just starts getting inputted, and you start to see everything as like you think it's the way it is. It's just really lovely to like have a different perspective on things, and his music did that for me, and it inspired me to try to make what I think what I had inside. You realizing like, oh, this guy made the craziest stuff, and it's being received, and people enjoy it. It just kind of goes to show like it's worth to try to follow your own vision, especially if it's like and if you feel got some wild ideas, get them out there. And so that was definitely an influential album, and his music in general is pretty amazing, as well as Square Pusher. I was at the time both those guys. I was like, I saw Square Pusher live, and I felt like I was watching somebody who came from another planet, like aliens play music. It felt that surreal to me. I was like, I could not believe what I was hearing, and that actually transcended his albums. Like, I thought his music was really cool, like on record, but when I saw the live performance, I was like, I cannot believe what I'm hearing right now. And watching the way people responded, like people were dancing so crazy to that stuff, and it was like open for interpretation. But I felt like what I really liked about it was there was no sort of structure to how people would move or feel it. You would see guys kind of dancing like it was like a reggae beat, like in this halftime, and then you see people freaking out like it because it's real spazzy stuff.
Going
like
double time, yeah.
Yeah, like he kind of worked all around a lot of the, like at the time it was like a lot of jungle drum and bass-esque beats, but he was playing like live bass and funk fusion stuff over it. And then just having crazy like synth stuff going on at the same time. But that's one of those artists that I think that now I know people listen to those guys for sure, but I think at the time you really couldn't underestimate how much of an influence they had on the rest of the world and like the way people made music, especially for me. Yeah.
As you developed your sound, like you discussed some of those artists and how their sound influenced you. What is the sound that you are going for? If you could summarize all your music, I could ask it another way. Why music? Or what is your X factor? What separates you from everybody else?
I suppose I am making something that I feel, and I am a weirdo. But I know that I like as time has gone on, I realize that I'm not like alone in my feelings. I found like I had a difficult time as a kid, like in school, and had to find my own way. And music was my answer. So for me, I feel like if it does resonate with people, I think it's like something that outsiders or people that don't necessarily fit in or want to feel a little different could definitely maybe resonate with. And for me, it's just been a magical thing that people listen to my music, because I felt like I had something to say, and I knew I had an original voice. I just didn't know like if anyone would want to listen to it. And like recently people have been writing and telling me like, oh, this song really helped me, or that kind of stuff. So and it's interesting because it's like it's hard for me to hear my own music and know like how it sounds. I don't have that perspective. But as recently, I feel like it's starting to find its own voice, and also find like similar artists that that are like maybe people can say, oh, I also like this and I like that, which is really interesting to me because I wasn't sure how it would fit in or how it would be classified. But if anything, it resonates with the natural world. I think I long to see like a world where like I don't see a car for like a little while, or I don't have to see like just the feelings that you get when you're not feeling like you have to be a part of a world which is like maybe unnatural or like just unrelaxed. I like to imagine like a world, maybe it's futuristic or maybe it's in the past. I've thought about this a lot. Like maybe the lives someone had 100 years ago could have been some of the best lives ever lived, you know? Like sure, it could be the opposite in different situations, but you can imagine like in the US what it would have been like to live here 2,000 years ago when it was like just wonderland, you know, and you hear about people like drinking from rivers and stuff like that. It's like, wow, that's a beautiful thought. So I think I long for like those fantasies of like, oh, that would be a really beautiful world to live in. And I try to escape with music that way. I hope that made some bit of sense.
We'll send you to Alaska. Yeah, we should send you to Alaska.
Yeah, I might get eaten by a bear.
Like you'll get a good taste. Yeah, exactly. But it definitely makes me, as you're talking, makes me think of like John Muir and like going through nature and exploring all these, you know, parks and identifying things. And when I listen to your music, I definitely do get that sense of relief. It seems like you're not in the hustle bustle of the city, whatever words you know, there's probably better words out there than that. But I definitely get a sense of calmness and serenity and peacefulness from your music. So I do appreciate you putting it out there. What are the best places that people can go to find you and to keep up to date with your latest releases, or if they wanted to contact you, what are the best platforms to do so?
I have a website just under my name, richardhoughten.com, and I have a contact form so people can hit me up there. And right now, I guess like Spotify under my name is good, and then I have a Bandcamp, and I've released music under like different aliases, and at the time I released music as Bloomy Pedal. So I think my Bandcamp is like Bloomy Pedal, but all my Richard Houghten releases are under there. And yeah, that's the best place to check out my music.
And how do you spell your name for anybody listening out there who might not know?
Oh, it's so Richard, and then Houghten is Houghten, and it's very often misspelled with an O, but I've pretty much accepted it at this point. But yeah, it's Ten. So
perfect. Well, I appreciate you sharing that, because I know for myself, spelling was not a strong suit in school, that's for sure. So it's helpful to get the right spelling and get you on your way.
Yeah.
So is there anything else that you'd like to share about music, about life, about anything?
Just really excited to continue to make more music and see where music goes. It's like right now I've been really fascinated to try to like find, there's so much music out there that it's almost overwhelming. I'm like, how do I find new music? It used to just be so simple. It would be like, oh, there's like 20 artists kind of doing this thing. So I've been looking for like new music that's like that really inspires me, and I'm looking for different. I'm open to people to send me stuff too. It would be really cool if people sometimes recommend me music. But yeah,
absolutely. Well, Richard, thank you so much for your time today, for being part of the podcast, and for putting your music out there and sharing everything that you've learned, some of the tips and tricks and strategies for going backwards in time and recording on 4-track. So that's some cool stuff. So thank you again for your time and being on the show.
Oh, you're welcome. It was super enjoyable. Thanks, man.
Listening to the Freio Music Podcast with Michael Morahan. Be sure to like, subscribe, and hit that notification bell so you don't miss a single episode. And don't forget to share this podcast everywhere. Thanks for listening, and until next time, stay tuned.
Freio Music. You are listening to Freio Music.